Let's talk about Law 19, because this is one of the most quietly dangerous laws in the entire book. Not dangerous in the dramatic sense, dangerous in the everyday sense. The kind of law that ruins careers, alliances, and reputations without anyone ever throwing a punch. The law says know who you're dealing with, do not offend the wrong person. And at first glance, that sounds obvious. Of course you should know who you're dealing with. Of course you shouldn't offend people unnecessarily. But the reason Green included this as a law is because most people don't actually follow it, especially when they feel confident, morally justified, or intellectually superior. And that's when this law gets them. Because the mistake isn't offending people in general. The mistake is offending the wrong kind of person. Not everyone reacts to offense the same way. And assuming they do is where things start to go sideways. Some people forget, some people forgive, some people don't care enough to respond at all. And then there are people who never forget, never forgive, and don't react immediately. Those are the ones this law is really about. One of the biggest traps people fall into is projecting their own psychology onto others. They assume that because they would shrug something off or talk it through or let it go, the other person will too. That's almost never true. Power dynamics are shaped less by what you say and more by how the other person experiences it. And then there are people who never forget, never forgive, and don't react immediately. Those are the ones this law is really about. One of the biggest traps people fall into is projecting their own psychology onto others. They assume that because they would shrug something off or talk it through or let it go, the other person will too. That's almost never true. Power dynamics are shaped less by what you say and more by how the other person experiences it. And once you offend someone who holds grudges, who feels humiliation deeply, or who operates indirectly, you've created a problem that often doesn't show up until much later. That's why this law matters. Because retaliation doesn't always look like retaliation. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like cooperation. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all. Until suddenly doors stop opening, information stops flowing, opportunities disappear, and you have no idea why. Green talks about different personality types for a reason. There are people who are openly aggressive, there are people who are passive, there are people who are emotionally volatile, and there are people who are cold, patient, and strategic. If you offend the first group, at least you know where you stand. If you offend the last group, you often don't realize you've done damage until it's already compounded. History is full of examples of this. One of the clearest is Nicolas Fouquet, the finance minister under Louis XIV. Fouquet was brilliant, he was wealthy, he was well connected, and he thought he was untouchable. So he built a palace, not just any palace, a spectacular one. Lavish, extravagant, a display of taste, power, and influence. And then he invited the king. That was the mistake, because Louis didn't see the palace as admiration. He saw it as competition, as disrespect, as a reminder that someone beneath him appeared richer, more admired, more dazzling. Fouquet thought he was impressing the king. In reality, he was humiliating him. Louis smiled, he attended the party, he praised the beauty of the estate, and then quietly, methodically, he destroyed Fouquet's life. Imprisoned him, seized his assets, erased him, not out of rage, out of wounded pride. That's the kind of person Law 19 is warning you about. Because not everyone responds in the moment. Some people respond when the timing is perfect. Another trap people fall into is assuming that status predicts reaction. It doesn't. You might think someone with power is more secure, more forgiving, more above petty offense. Often it's the opposite. People who've climbed high often have more ego invested in how they're perceived, not less. They're sensitive to slights because slights threaten the identity they've built. And the higher someone sits, the more options they have to retaliate quietly. This is why sarcasm, cleverness, and public correction are so risky. You might feel like you're just being honest, or just joking, or just telling the truth. But honesty without calibration is not virtue. It's negligence. This law doesn't say never offend anyone. That's impossible. It says know the terrain before you move, before you speak, before you challenge, before you embarrass someone. Ask yourself a simple question. What kind of person is this really? Do they have a history of grudges? Do they need to feel superior? Do they care deeply about respect, reputation, or control? Do they operate directly or indirectly? Because the same comment that strengthens one relationship can quietly poison another. And here's the part people don't like hearing. Intent doesn't protect you. Accuracy doesn't protect you. Being right doesn't protect you. Only awareness does. There's also a moral trap built into this law. People hear it and think it's telling them to be fake, submissive, or cowardly. It's not. It's telling you to be strategic. There's a difference between speaking truth and delivering it in a way that creates unnecessary enemies. Power is not about expressing yourself at all times. It's about choosing when expression serves you and when restraint serves you better. Sometimes the strongest move is silence. Sometimes it's indirection. Sometimes it's letting someone save face even when you could expose them. Not because they deserve it, but because you don't deserve the consequences of humiliating them. Another thing this law highlights is asymmetry. You might offend someone casually. They might take it personally. You might forget the interaction entirely. They might replay it for years. That imbalance is what makes this dangerous. Because while you've moved on, they've been planning. And planning doesn't always mean revenge. Sometimes it just means waiting for the moment when they don't have to help you anymore. Law 19 is really about respecting invisible variables. You don't always know how much power someone actually has, how long their memory is, how patient they are, or how they prefer to strike back. So the safest assumption is that people are more sensitive, more observant, and more capable of retaliation than they appear. That doesn't mean walking on eggshells, it means not being careless with ego. Carelessness is what gets people in trouble, not courage. This is especially relevant now, in a world where conversations are public, criticism is performative, and social penalties are often delayed. Offending the wrong person today doesn't always lead to confrontation. It leads to exclusion, shadow banning, quiet undermining. You don't get attacked, you get bypassed, and that's often worse. So what does applying this law actually look like? It looks like observing before engaging. It looks like listening more than speaking early on. It looks like understanding what someone values before you challenge it. And when you do need to confront, it means choosing methods that minimize humiliation. Private over public, indirect over direct, timing over impulse. Because once someone feels exposed, diminished, or disrespected, the relationship shifts permanently. You don't get to control how people interpret your actions. You only get to control whether you've thought through the consequences. Law 19 isn't about fear, it's about foresight. It's about recognizing that power doesn't just respond to logic, it responds to emotion, memory, and pride. And offending the wrong person isn't always loud. Sometimes it's subtle. A look, a joke, a dismissal, but the consequences are rarely subtle. Know who you're dealing with. Because the most dangerous enemies are often the ones who smile, say nothing, and remember everything. That's Law 19.